Picking up from my last video looking at the Dark Knight Returns wave from McFarlane Toys, today I'm going to continue that look by reviewing the Carrie Kelly Robin. So let's dive straight into this by taking a look at the packaging, and straight away you're going to see that this packaging is pretty much near identical to what we saw with Batman, and indeed for most of the DC Multiverse figures from McFarlane Toys. And as noted in last week's video, the packaging is much more of a square shape this time around rather than the traditional rectangle that we get in this series. And that is of course to accommodate the giant Build-A-Figure piece, which is the horse, which again we took a look at last week. Other than that, the design layout is pretty much identical to every other figure that we get in this line, which is a real shame considering that this is a series that is focused on the multiverse, so it is an excuse almost to actually vary up the branding and the design of this packaging. But no, McFarlane have stayed true to their guns and given us the same packaging consistently now for several years. And for my liking, it tends to be pretty bland. We have these big giant black borders, and then on the inside of the packaging we have this nice collage effect, which is pretty good. But then if we look at the side panel, again, there's an awful lot of wasted space here. There's no colourful images of the character taken from the comic books or from the films or the TV shows. It's just literally a black border with their name on it. And then finally, if we look at the back of the packaging, this tends to be a little bit more exciting because they do have a little bit of original artwork here, even though it is just a photograph of the toys. But this one, in this wave, is focused very much on the Build-A-Figure, and it's the same on every single figure in this 4-figure wave, which is a shame because, as you can see at the bottom of the packaging, each character does have their own unique artwork that would have worked much better as a central image on the back of this packaging. Okay, so on to the figure itself, and I think straight away you're going to notice that I've had to use the display stand for this figure because I could not get her to stand up straight on her own 2 feet. That's not a great start. But looking on the bright side, the sculpting I think is pretty top notch, as you would expect from McFarlane. This looks pretty much comic book accurate to me. This looks pretty authentic. I think they've caught the likeness as portrayed by Frank Miller in The Dark Knight Returns. And what's more, they've gone the extra mile by actually having a paint wash running through the hair as well to give it a little bit more texture, a little bit more nuance when it comes to those colours, and it just looks a bit better, a bit more detailed and a bit more lifelike, which is fantastic. And if we look more closely, you'll see that the glasses that she's wearing are actually sculpted in, but they've got that translucent plastic there, which works really well, because when you look through there, you can actually see they've bothered to paint the eyes in. There's enough detail there, which is quite nice. So all in all, I think they've done a really good job with this head sculpt. It's really nice to see some decent paint apps, because it's one of the things I'm quite critical of McFarlane Toys as a rule. They don't tend to capitalise on their sculpts, but they've done a really nice job here, and I can't fault them for that. Likewise, I think they've done a fantastic job when it comes to the sculpting of the rest of this body. This is, to the best of my knowledge, all original pieces. I don't think I've seen any of these before in the McFarlane line, but please do correct me if I'm wrong. But again, all the key details are actually sculpted in rather than just painted in, which I personally really like. It just gives it a bit more depth, a bit more texture. So the R of the Robin, the individual buttons, the belt, that's all sculpted in rather than painted on. And the bottom of the tunic there is actually a rubber piece as well, which is very nice to see. So again, it gives that little bit of flexibility, which is important when we come to looking at the articulation. The colours they've used for this figure are really bright and colourful. It is moulded in that green or that yellow plastic or the red plastic, so there's not really much in the way of paint taps. But to be fair, for Robin, I don't know whether you actually need it because the character is so bright and colourful anyway. It doesn't seem to matter. So to be honest, I'm kind of contradicting myself with this figure, but I actually think that works in this figure's favour, that it doesn't have any washes running through the central body of the figure. Once again, McFarlane have opted for a rubber cape, which I'm not a huge fan of. It is moulded into a set pattern. There's nothing you can do with this. It's not really malleable. Yes, it's flexible to a degree, but you can't pose it in any meaningful way, and it tends to be quite heavy and it drags the figure over. So I'd much rather they adopted more cloth capes, but this is what we're stuck with. One of the challenges facing McFarlane Toys when adapting a work like The Dark Knight Returns, where you have an artist has a very specific, very stylized way of working, is it doesn't always translate that well to action figures. And Robin's one of those characters where the dimensions are just a little bit off, and it doesn't really translate to a figure that can balance perfectly well by themselves. And there is an absolutely glaring issue with this figure in that she cannot stand freely on her own, or at least I can't get mine to stand freely on her own. And that's because, of course, she has a very small surface area on her feet. but it's compounded by the ball joints in the ankles, which looks awful. Let's just be honest, like it's just very noticeable. It really sticks out, and it just doesn't look in proportion with the rest of the figure. It just looks unnatural. But taking that out of it, mine absolutely will not move, as we'll see when we look at the articulation in just a few moments. But consequently, this means that I've got to pose in this really awkward pose and use the display stand, because otherwise I'm not going to be able to get it to stand up. So let's look at the articulation. At the top of the neck there is a ball joint, and this allows for lots and lots of flexibility. She can move her head from side to side, she can lean it left and right, she can spin it all the way around, and she can nod it up and down, all in really dramatic fashion. There's actually a huge amount of flexibility and motion here, which is tremendous. She also has ball joints in her shoulders, so she can lift her arms up and out, and there is a swivel there at the top of the bicep, so she can rotate that arm around. There's double joints at the elbow, and there's a ball joint, unfortunately, at the wrist. Again, just like with the ankles, this looks really unsightly and is a little bit impractical. I really don't like this joint on McFarlane Toys, but yeah, she can hinge her hand forwards and backwards and rotate it all around. There is also a butterfly joint, which is absolutely fantastic. This is in the chest area, but as you can see, the figure tends to be a little bit brittle, but thankfully these pieces do slot back into place easily enough. There does seem to be a swivel at the waist, but it's not particularly very giving, and I can't get an awful lot out of this. There's ball joints in the hips, the legs will kick out to the side, they'll kick forwards and backwards, and of course there's a double joint at the knee there, so the lower leg can kick all the way back. Now, as I mentioned, sadly I couldn't get any movement out of the ball joints at the ankle, and I'm sure this is supposed to hinge forwards and backwards, but I can't get it to do anything other than swivel from side to side. Finally, there is some toe articulation, so you can hinge that forwards and backwards. Sadly, Robin is also pretty light on accessories. She just comes with her slingshot. This is a nice piece. I'm glad that she comes with this. Of course, this is unique to this version of the character. And to be fair, it's sculpted and painted well, and it fits in her hands no problem whatsoever. This is perfectly sculpted, and it's nice and snug fit, and it looks pretty cool. She can even get her finger pulling the back of the slingshot there as well, which is very cool. So that's really well done. It's just a shame that she doesn't come with any other bits and pieces, not even an extra pair of hands. In terms of scaling, she stands roughly about 6 inches tall, which is perfect scaling for Batman and the other figures in this wave. This looks really nice when you put them together, and I have to say, the vibrance and bright colours of Robin contrast so nicely against the dour, darker colours of the Batman, and these two contrast against each other really, really nicely. And I have to say, the Robin figure, if nothing else, is very colourful and stands out in your collection when you put her on display. But overall, I'm going to have to be a little bit ruthless today and give her 2 stars. I have to admit, I'm pretty disappointed by this figure. Now, certainly, she does have some virtues. I think it's quite nicely sculpted. Some of the articulation in the head in particular is really nicely done. The accessory she does come with, the slingshot, is really nice and works pretty well, and it's nice and colourful and bright, and as I said, I appreciate all the sculpting and the effort that's gone into the figure, but you can't get away from the fact that ultimately I'm really, really struggling to pose mine. That is absolutely huge, and she's stuck in this permanently awkward position that it just doesn't look very great. I mean, it's fine, it's serviceable, but I can't get her to do anything else that I want her to do. And it might well be that I've just been super unlucky, and on yours they will work perfectly well and you'll have no issues. But I have found this to be a reoccurring issue with McFarlane Toys. These ball joints they use feel a little bit cheap, they tend to snap, or they tend not to work the way you want them to. And this is the worst example that I've had so far, where I just can't get them to budge at all. So that's a huge no-no for me. Also, I think she'd struggle to stand anyway without that, because of the small surface area of the feet. So this is definitely a key issue. And I also think that maybe they should have given her some extra accessories. And I know she comes with a Build-A-Figure piece, and I know that there's some new original moulding here, but she's still smaller than the other figures in this line, and I don't think it would have cost that much more just to give her an extra pair of hands at the minimum. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like, and remember to subscribe, as there'll be plenty more videos soon.